Good evening, everyone. It seems that, there's one of my usual panelists. And I had one other, but she was having difficulty hearing me. So I'm going to go ahead and forge ahead. Annabelle, how are you? Happy New Year. Can you hear me?
Good evening. Yes, there we are. Thank you. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year. It looks like people are snowed in and
snowed in.
Yeah, we're
it's so mild here, New York area.
It is, huh? Well, Middle Atlantic.
They threatened a sprinkling of snow today, but it never happened.
Yeah, we had nothing serious from my perspective because I grew up in central New York, but around here it's serious if you have, the first flake of snow and they close school. I was just seeing the announcement that school is closed tomorrow. And so we are live on YouTube. And tell me Happy New Year. How are you doing?
Well, schools here are closed because of the virus.
Yeah.
And that's, I think at least teachers closed. I know, they have a temporary hold for a couple of weeks, and then they're going to revisit it. So I don't know what's going to happen out of all that.
Well, here the schools are closed for the virus, but they don't want to admit it, so they were blessed with a snowstorm instead, so they have an excuse. But anyway, so I had decided that I would just forge ahead. Good evening, Justin. It's good to see you. Happy New Year to you. Justin Case is with us from Denmark. And so I thought what I would do is, I'm not sure how exciting this particular chapter is, so I thought I would just blast through it. But if you want to help me, that would be great. And we'll stop at the end of each paragraph and see if there's anything to talk about. Okay, so we're on page 80 of my edition, which is paragraph 121, and we're studying the synthetic or constructive method, whatever that is. And it's in two essays on analytical psychology by C.G. Jung, volume 7 of the collected works of C.G. Jung.
Yes.
So I will begin with paragraph 121. The process of coming to terms with the unconscious is a true labor, a work which involves both action and suffering. It has been named the transcendent function because it represents a function based on real and imaginary, or rational and irrational data, thus bridging the yawning gulf between conscious and unconscious. It is a natural process, a manifestation of the energy that springs from the tension of opposites, and it consists in a series of fantasy occurrences which occur spontaneously in dreams and visions. The same process can also be observed in the initial stages of certain forms of schizophrenia. A classical account of such a proceeding is to be found, for example, in Gérard de Nerval's autobiographical fragment, Aurelia. But the most important literary example is part 2 of Faust. The natural process by which the opposites are united came to serve me as the model and basis for a method consisting essentially in this. Everything that happens at the behest of nature, unconsciously and spontaneously, is deliberately summoned forth and integrated into the conscious mind and its outlook. Failure in many cases is due precisely to the fact that they lack the mental and spiritual equipment to master the events taking place in them. Here, medical help must intervene in the form of a special method of treatment. Okay, so what he's talking about is we all experience this coming alive of the unconscious and the connection between the unconscious and the conscious minds, between self small s and self large s. Happy New Year, Neil. Welcome. And so
I do like this footnote, Skip. Do you want to read it, or shall I read it?
Go for it. Go for it.
I discovered only subsequently that the idea of the transcendent function also occurs in the higher mathematics. And it is actually the name of the function of real and imaginary numbers. See also my essay, The Transcendent Function. There are a couple of reasons why that speaks to me today.
Mm-hmm.
I was at Coney Island walking on the beach today because I had my last day off for the vacation. Mm-hmm. And they had an exhibit, which I didn't go inside, but it said 4D. It said it was an exhibit of 4D, 4 dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I think I've spoken about it in this group. The notion of 4 dimensions has become a little more real to me as I've had this sense since my eye operations that we're not looking at a perspective that ends in a point, but that actually perspective is something a little more like a Mobius strip. Mm-hmm. So when I saw this name of this exhibit, I thought, oh, great, people are on to this. And then I went over, right up to the ocean because it was nice and hard sand and it was just me and the birds basically, and looked off at that horizon to that, what I've always imagined since childhood is the slope of the earth,
yes.
To actually kind of see it. I'm farsighted as a child. So that's one thing that's brought up in here. It's in the paragraph, but it's specifically spoken about in that footnote. Yeah.
Right.
Which is where he becomes kind of subjective, right? It's almost like the paragraph he's writing in this a little bit detached, and so it came to pass, blah, blah, blah. But then in the footnote, he says, well, the reason I'm saying this is because.
Yeah. I do remember the transcendent function in math and higher math.
Yes.
And imaginary numbers in math. And the point is that if we don't have imagination, we're basically no better than slugs. And so I want to highly recommend a movie to you and to our YouTube audience, which is called Don't Look Up. Have you seen this?
Yes, I have.
Oh, it's on.
It was highly recommended by my Jungian analyst just last week. So I watched it immediately.
and it's on Netflix. And
yes.
So everyone has to see this. Leonardo DiCaprio is very likely going to win an Academy Award for his performance. Especially when he loses it at the end in the TV studio.
Right.
Because he goes through so many emotions. And
which is a little bit like Network. And Network was, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
This is more sophisticated than Network, though.
Yeah.
Considerably more. And so they just dumped on everybody. It's so funny the way they did it. And it's just I don't want to spoil it. And so I'm not going to say anything more about it, but it's a standard old saw in movies, which is there's a comet going to hit the earth, and what are we going to do about it? And what they do about it is interesting, to say the least. And Mr. Logan Cooper, I don't know what Vask.tech is, but unless you explain that, I will take it as an advertisement for something you are doing, in which case I'm going to block you from this website, from this YouTube channel. And, nothing personal. It's just, you can explain it if you want, but if you don't want, then subtly ask you to leave. And so, okay, Annabelle, we'll give him one paragraph to explain himself or leave, and it'll be a paragraph that you read. So,
shall I read the next one? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
122. As we have seen, the theories discussed at the beginning of this book rest on an exclusively causal and reductive procedure which resolves the dream or fantasy into its memory components and the underlying instinctual processes. I have indicated above the justification as well as the limitation of this procedure. It breaks down at the point where the dream symbols can no longer be reduced to personal reminiscences or aspirations. That is, when the images of the collective unconscious begin to appear. It would be quite senseless to try to reduce these collective ideas to anything personal. Not only senseless, but positively harmful, as painful experience has taught me. Only with much difficulty, after long hesitation and disabuse by many failures, was I able to decide to abandon the purely personalistic attitude of medical psychology in the sense indicated. I had first to come to the fundamental realization that analysis, insofar as it is reduction and nothing more, must necessarily be followed by synthesis, and that certain kinds of psychic material mean next to nothing, if simply broken down, but display a wealth of meaning if, instead of being broken down, that meaning is reinforced and extended by all the conscious means at our disposal, by the so-called method of amplification. And for an account of amplification, see the theory of psychoanalysis, paragraph, blah, blah, blah. The images or symbols of the collective unconscious yield their distinctive values only when subjected to a synthetic mode of treatment. Just as analysis breaks down the symbolical fantasy material into its components, so the synthetic procedure integrates it into a general and intelligible statement. The procedure is not exactly simple, so I will give an example which will help to explain the whole process.
Okay. I'm just, okay, Justin tells me that this person is a spam robot site from Russia, and it uses, so I'm going to go back. Let's just block this. Okay. All right. So thank you, Justin. I've removed that bot from the site, and we won't be seeing his material anymore, or its material, I guess we should say, creature that it is. Okay, so the point is that if we have dreams, we need to integrate them and be able to understand what they're telling us. And when we do that, it makes us more and more whole. And, part of this whole point, there's a great quote in Liberating the Heart where it says that, the whole process of Jungian psychology is based on opening a channel between the conscious and unconscious minds. And so that you create this ego self axis. And if you do that, then healing material can come up into your conscious mind and you can integrate it. And that is the healing power. And that's what we're working on in our confluence next June, this coming June, is that we're trying to show you how you can open this channel between your conscious and unconscious, and then have the benefit and the feeling, the wonderful feeling of being healed, just like a faith healer would heal you, perhaps, but we're doing it in a little more open way. We're not going to be pretending that we're magic or anything like that. So, anyway, I'm going to leave your that message, Justin, hidden only because I don't want to advertise him anymore. But anyway, do you have a comment there before we go into this dream that this woman had?
Well, only that when he talked about two different kinds of images in dreams, and the one being something one can recognize from one's personal life. And I had a dream recently of people shouting congratulations, and the happy shouts were sort of familiar kind of cheerleaders, and the fear shouts, there were faces that looked like a particular image I had seen by Alfred Jarry. And I just today encountered a copy of that image, and that was about a week ago that I had the dream, and it was like, right, that was in my dream, and now I know specifically. I'm connecting that that's where it came from, because it was very specifically. But there was another dream that I had, and as you know from these recent weeks, my father died November 22nd. So I'm here in day 42 after he died. But 2 weeks before he died, I had a dream that he had died. I had a dream of an effigy. And yesterday I described it to a friend, and I was trying to describe what the effigy, kind of represented. And I said it was kind of like an Egyptian mummy. And there are mummies that I've seen that have been wrapped so much that the figure was much taller than a normal figure. And in my dream, the effigy was taller than a tree. And in my process of healing and reflecting and processing and all of what I'm doing, praying in relation to my father's death, I keep coming back to that dream because that image didn't come from someplace. So that's what I read in this paragraph.
Yeah.
There was one that was a very specific Alfred Jarry face. There it was in my dream. Okay. Here was this other dream, and it took place a week before my father went into the hospital. My father's been in and out of the hospital lots of times in the last 13 years that he was living in Florida, and he rarely stayed for more than 36 hours. Some little thing, he went to the hospital.
Yeah.
But this one, he went in a week after the dream, and then a week later, he had died. So that dream, I think, was the collective unconscious.
It's a prefiguration telling you that it's going to happen.
Yes, preparing me, and giving me imagery. That's what the paragraph is about. It's about imagery, and it gave me imagery to kind of work with, and I'm still working with it. Yeah.
So Lasvi says Carlos Castaneda called it a bridge, and Justin then says he much enjoyed the teachings of Don Juan and its sequels. I think a lot of us enjoyed the teachings of Don Juan.
Yeah.
Maybe in a period way, but in any case.
It's ancient history to me. I mean, I read those books so many decades ago.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to read the next couple of paragraphs. I'm going to read to 126 here. So from paragraph 123, a woman patient who had just reached the critical borderline between the analysis of the personal unconscious and the emergence of contents from the collective unconscious had the following dream. She is about to cross a wide river. There is no bridge, but she finds a ford where she can cross. She is on the point of doing so when a large crab that lay hidden in the water seizes her by the foot and will not let her go. She wakes up in terror. Okay, so associations, river forms a boundary that is difficult to get across. I have to overcome an obstacle, probably to do with the fact that I'm progressing so slowly. I ought to reach the other side. Okay, so that's the boundary. Ford, an opportunity to cross in safety, a possible way, otherwise the river would be too broad. In the treatment lies the possibility of surmounting the obstacle. And the crab was quite hidden in the water. I did not see it before. Cancer, German Krebs equals crab, is a terrible disease, incurable, reference to Mrs. X who died of carcinoma. I'm afraid of this disease. The crab is an animal that walks backwards and obviously wants to drag me into the river. It caught hold of me in a horrible way, and I was terribly frightened. What keeps stopping me from getting across? Oh yes, I had another row with a friend of mine, a woman. Okay. You want to comment on this dream or carry on?
I think carry on.
Okay, go for 127 then.
Oh, all right. There is something peculiar about her relations with this friend. It is a sentimental attachment bordering on the homosexual that has lasted for years. The friend is like the patient in many ways and equally nervy. They have marked artistic interests in common. The patient is the stronger personality of the two. Because their mutual relationship is too intimate and excludes too many of the other possibilities of life, both are nervy and, despite their ideal friendship, have violent scenes due to mutual irritability. The unconscious is trying in this way to put a distance between them, but they refuse to listen. The quarrel usually begins because one of them finds that she is still not sufficiently understood and urges that they should speak more plainly to one another, whereupon both make enthusiastic efforts to unbosom themselves. Naturally, a misunderstanding comes about in next to no time, and a worse scene than ever ensues. Faute de mieux, this quarreling had long been for both of them a pleasure substitute, which they were unwilling to relinquish. My patient in particular could not do without the sweet pain of being misunderstood by her best friend, although every scene, quote, tired her to death, close quote. She had long since realized that this friendship had become moribund, and that only false ambition led her to believe that something ideal could still be made of it. She had formerly had an exaggerated, fantastic relation to her mother, and after her mother's death, had transferred her feelings to her friend.
Yeah.
I feel like that paragraph was all over the place and told us a lot of things we didn't know before. So I'm not sure what to make of all of that. First he said sexual, then he said transferring mother in the end. And in between, all that not being heard, not being understood. It sounds like there was a dynamism in the relationship that was ultimately negative, and the dreams were trying to end the relationship. I think the
perhaps.
whole question of ending friendships is very loaded anyway.
Yeah, and of course, some people get excited by having fights.
Yes.
And
especially if you've got transference to your mother and you didn't get along with your mother, and now you have this great opportunity to relive that animosity, hostility, whatever it was.
Yeah.
That can be what
and
you might
that's
call fruitful. Right?
Yep. Well, it is customary.
I've got to fight with somebody.
It is customary with young girls to fight with their mother so that they can get out from under them.
Yeah.
And
not necessarily unhealthy.
And not necessarily unhealthy, but it's awfully painful.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts about this?
Well, only those at the moment. The woman knew that the friendship was moribund, but she needs to, move on. And so in order for that to happen, what has to happen is this transcendent function has to open up, and her unconscious has to tell her what she has to do in order to move on. Okay. I think that's what we're trying to say. And so anyway, let's carry on for a bit here. Okay, so there's two interpretations of this dream. One is a causal reductive interpretation, analytical. Paragraph 128. This interpretation can be summed up in one sentence. I see well enough that I ought to cross the river, that is, give up relations with my friend, but I would much rather that my friend did not let me out of her clutches, i.e. embraces, which as an infantile wish means that I want mother to draw me to her in the exuberant embrace I know so well. The incompatibility of the wish lies in the strong undercurrent of homosexuality, abundantly proved by the facts. The crab seizes her by the foot. The patient has large masculine feet. She plays the masculine role with her friend and has corresponding sexual fantasies. The foot has a notoriously phallic significance, thus the overall interpretation would be, the reason why she does not want to leave her friend is because she has repressed sexual desires for her. As these desires are morally and aesthetically incompatible with the tendency of the conscious personality, they are repressed and therefore more or less unconscious. Her anxiety corresponds to her repressed desire. Right. Okay. Comments? That seems fairly straightforward.
Yeah, that seems pretty straightforward.
Okay, carry on with paragraph 129 then.
This interpretation is a severe depreciation of the patient's exalted ideal of friendship. To be sure, at this point in the analysis, she would no longer have taken exception to such an interpretation. Sometime earlier, certain facts had amply convinced her of her homosexual tendency, so that she could freely admit this inclination, although it was by no means agreeable to her. If then I had given her this interpretation at the present stage of treatment, I would have not encountered any resistance. She had already overcome the painfulness of this unwelcome tendency by understanding it. But she would have said to me, why are we still analyzing this dream? It only reiterates what I have known for a long time. The interpretation, in fact, tells the patient nothing new. It is therefore uninteresting and ineffective. Such an interpretation would have been impossible at the beginning of the treatment because the unusual prudery of the patient would not under any circumstances have admitted anything of that kind. The quote, poison, quote, of understanding had to be injected with extreme care and in very small doses until she gradually became more reasonable. Now, when the analytical or causal reductive interpretation ceases to bring to light anything new, but
ceases to bring to light.
Yeah.
Right.
Causal reductive interpretation ceases to bring to light anything new, but only the same thing in different variations. The moment has come to look out for possible archetypal motifs. If such a motif comes clearly to the forefront, it is high time to change the interpretative procedure. The causal reductive procedure has, in this particular case, certain disadvantages. Firstly, it does not take accurate account of the patient's associations, e.g., the association of crab with cancer. Secondly, the peculiar choice of the symbol remains unexplained. Why should the mother friend appear as a crab? A prettier and more graphic representation would have been a water nymph. Quote, half drew she him, half sank he under, close quote, etc. An octopus, a dragon, a snake, or a fish would have served as well. Thirdly, the causal reductive procedure forgets that the dream is a subjective phenomenon and that consequently an exhaustive interpretation can never refer the crab to the friend or the mother alone, but must refer it also to the subject, the dreamer herself. The dreamer is the whole dream. She is the river, the ford, and the crab. Or rather, these details express conditions and tendencies in the unconscious of the subject.
Righto. And so when she's afraid the crab is going to drown her, she's talking about herself drowning herself. Okay, so we're let's see. I want to just check back here a sec. Okay, this is still the analytical causal method. So I have therefore introduced the following terminology. I call every interpretation which equates the dream images with real objects in an interpretation on the objective level. In contrast to this is the interpretation that refers every part of the dream and all the actors in it back to the dreamer himself. This I call interpretation on the subjective level. Interpretation on the objective level is analytical because it breaks down the dream content into memory complexes that refer to external situations. Interpretation on the subjective level is synthetic because it detaches the underlying memory complexes from their external causes, regards them as tendencies or components of the subjects, and reunites them with that subject. In any experience, I experience not merely the object, but first and foremost myself, provided, of course, that I render myself an account of the experience. In this case, therefore, all the contents of the dream are treated as symbols for subjective contents. Thus, the synthetic and constructive process of interpretation is interpretation on the subjective level. Okay, now we're going to go over to another major topic here, which is this synthetic constructive interpretation.
So. What was it Jung at this point who began to interpret dreams as entirely subjective in that way that people commonly know now? I mean, calling the river and the crab and everything yourself. Yeah.
Yes.
So this was the beginning of that.
Right. And that's what I recall, that, if you have a house in a dream or a car, both of them are you.
Right, right.
And yeah. Okay, so go ahead. The synthetic constructive.
So thus the synthetic or constructive process of interpretation is interpretation on the subjective level. The synthetic constructive interpretation. The patient is unconscious of the fact that the obstacle to be overcome lies in herself, namely, a boundary line that is difficult to cross and hinders further progress. Nevertheless, it is possible to pass the barrier. But a special and unexpected danger looms up just at this moment, something animal, non-human or subhuman, which moves backwards and downwards, threatening to drag with it the whole personality of the dreamer. This danger is like a deadly disease that begins in some secret place and is incurable, overpowering. The patient imagines that her friend is hindering her and trying to drag her down. So long as she believes this, she must go on trying to, quote, uplift, close quote, her friend, educate and improve her. She has to make futile and senselessly idealistic efforts to stop herself from being dragged down. Naturally, her friend makes similar efforts too, for she is in the same pass as the patient. So the two keep jumping at each other like fighting cocks, each trying to get the upper hand. And the higher the pitch the one screws herself up to, the fiercer become the self-torments of the other. Why? Because each thinks the fault lies in the other, in the object. Interpretation on the subjective level brings release from this folly, for the dream shows the patient that she has something in herself which prevents her from crossing the boundary, i.e., from getting out of one situation or attitude into another. The interpretation of a change of place as a change of attitude is corroborated by forms of speech in certain primitive languages where, for example, quote, I am thinking of going, close quote, is expressed as, quote, I am at the place of or on the point of going, close quote. To make the language of dreams intelligible, we need numerous parallels from the psychology of primitive and historical symbolism, because dreams spring essentially from the unconscious, which contains remnants of the functional possibilities of all preceding epochs of evolution. A classical example of this is, quote, crossing of the great water, close quote, in the oracles of the I Ching, or it's one of the hexagrams.
Right. Okay. I'll carry on here.
Okay.
All right. Obviously, everything now depends on what is meant by the crab. We know in the first place that it is something connected with the friend, since the patient associates it with her friend, and also something connected with her mother. Whether mother and friend really have this quality and is irrelevant so far as the patient is concerned. The situation can be changed only by the patient changing herself. Nothing can be changed in the mother, for she is dead, and the friend cannot be nagged into changing. If she wants to change, that is her own affair. The fact that the quality in question is connected with the mother points to something infantile. What then is there in common in the patient's relation to her mother and her friend? The common factor is a violent sentimental demand for love, so impassioned that she feels herself overwhelmed. This demand has the character of an overpowering infantile craving, which, as we know, is blind. So we are dealing with an undisciplined, undifferentiated, and not yet humanized part of the libido, which still possesses the compulsive character of an instinct. a part still untamed by domestication. For such a part, some kind of animal is an entirely appropriate symbol. But why should the animal be a crab? The patient associates it with cancer, of which disease Mrs. X died at about the same age as that now reached by the patient herself. So there may be a hint of identification with Mrs. X. We must therefore follow this up. The patient relates the following facts about her. Mrs. X was widowed early. She was very merry and full of life. She had a series of adventures with men, and one in particular with an extremely gifted artist whom the patient knew personally and who always impressed her by remarkably fascinating and impressed her as remarkably fascinating and strange. Okay.
Shall I go on, or shall we talk about that?
I don't know.
Infantile business, which is being alluded to being sexual business and mother love business. I mean, it seems like all of those strands are being woven together in that paragraph.
Yeah. Probinik says, I look awfully submissive today. Perhaps this is because I'm looking down at my lap doing my reading. Here I can bring my reading book up higher, perhaps, because I'm not looking at my correct image. So if I pull it up like this, then maybe I'll be better. But anyway, Neil says I look relaxed and chilled. Yes, I am relaxed and chilled after an intense day, which I can't tell you about, but it was incredible. From the heights to the depths to the heights, two different worlds, plus this.
Yeah.
I don't know what I can say, but okay, so where are we? We're at 134.
Shall I continue? 130. Yeah, whatever that is. There are 4. And an identification can occur only on the basis of some unrealized, that is, unconscious similarity. Now, in what way is our patient similar to Mrs. X? Here I was able to remind the patient of a series of earlier fantasies and dreams, which had plainly shown that she too had a frivolous streak in her, and one which she always anxiously repressed, because she feared this dimly apprehended tendency in herself might betray her into leading an immoral life. With this, we have made a further important contribution toward understanding the, quote, animal, close quote, element. For once more, we come upon the same untamed instinctual craving, but this time directed towards men. And we have also discovered another reason why she cannot let go of her friend. She must cling to her so as not to fall victim to this other tendency, which seems to her much more dangerous. Accordingly, she remains at the infantile homosexual level because it serves her as a defense. Experience shows that this is one of the most potent motives for clinging to unsuitable infantile relationships. In this animal element, however, also lies her health, the germ of a future sound personality which will not shrink from the hazards of life.
Right.
And it sounds like what he means by hazards of life include allowing herself to be frivolous, allowing herself to be possibly what is referred to as immoral, because of this Mrs. X. In the previous paragraph described as she was very merry and full of life, which seemed to be positive.
Right. So, I think that through the evolution of this thing, she's realized that she has certain instinctual attractions to men that frighten her. And I think, this is the case of a lot of women who don't get going in their lives very early, but then ultimately, ultimately you have to choose, and you have to choose a life partner, and otherwise you're going to be very, very lonely, right? And so you have to have some sort of relationships in your life, right? And I hope I'm not offending you, Annabelle.
Not at all. No.
But I think, a lot of men are afraid of women, and vice versa, when they're young, when they're in their teens. And for men, if they're lucky, they run into a slightly more mature young woman who introduces him to life, which I know happened with my father. And I know that because I was born 5 months after my parents were married. And now I didn't know that officially. I sort of knew that, but I didn't know it officially until their 50th wedding anniversary. when they officially admitted it. And so I just mentioned to Justin, okay, Justin, I seem to have attracted all the bots now, and they're all coming here, and I'm deleting them as quickly as I can. Some have come across as sort of aliens, but one just came across as Dorothy Mills. And so I'm just, without further comment, just dropping them. It's amazing what these people get their jollies doing. They have to grow up and eventually get a life. There used to be a very popular saying in the United States, which was "get a life."
Right.
It was used in the movie The American President, where Michael Douglas says to his aide, "Man, you got to get a life," when he breaks in on him at age, at 5 o'clock in the morning, when Annette Bening is just leaving the White House. And so, the point is that all of us have to get a lot. All of us have to get a life. And that, in the case of my parents, after my father had graduated from the Naval Academy and was going to a 1-year postgraduate course at Harvard, my mother tempted him too much, and here I am. But that's the traditional way to get a man into life, because then you have to choose. Your girlfriend is pregnant, and do you marry her or not? And I think in my father's case, he may have postponed it maybe a little bit longer than he should have. But nevertheless, he stepped up. But I know a number of cases. I mean, this is very traditional among Naval Academy graduates, I think. And the same for women, where women get dragged into life typically by a man, one way or another, either gently or not gently, and then you're in life and you're going to have a kid and you've got to decide what you're going to do about it. So I don't know. Did I go on too long on that, Annabelle?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, then we carry.
But it gets complicated for a lot of people.
It does get complicated for a lot of people, and the point is that there are plenty of tomboys who think that they can be just another guy, but eventually they find out that they can't be, and they're going to be treated differently, and so, oh boy, I really have the crew here now. All the bots are after me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you starting to recognize them as bots?
Yeah, because they just throw a couple of words up and make it seem like they're saying something sensible, but really what they're doing is offering a link to some Russian porn site, apparently. So, so now Justin has told me how to recognize them, so they're going bye-bye. Anyway, you want to carry on? Where are we?
However, there also lies her health, right? In this animal element, however, also lies her health, the germ of a future sound personality, which will not shrink from the hazards of life. And when you were saying get a life, I think that is part of what you were saying, that not shrink from the hazards of life.
Yeah, you have to get into life.
Right, but the patient had drawn quite a different conclusion from the fate of Mrs. X. She had taken the latter's sudden grave illness and early death as the punishment of fate for the gay life which, without admitting it, the patient had always envied. When Mrs. X died, the patient made a very long moral face, which concealed an all too human, malicious satisfaction. To punish herself for this, she continually used the example of Mrs. X to scare herself away from life and all further development, and burdened herself with the misery of an unsatisfying friendship. Naturally, this whole sequence of events had never been clear to her. Otherwise, she would never have acted as she did. The rightness of this surmise was easily verified from the material.
Right. And so, it's pretty easy to see somebody that is afraid to go into life. They're living in their mother's basement type thing, and they need somebody to give them the boot. In the case of those people, and unfortunately, it looks like Jewel did not manage to get back with us, and so you can spend $150 an hour for an infinite number of visits to have a Jungian analyst straighten you out, or you can have your father or mother straighten you out with the boot. And it happens both ways, of course, and the question is how to do it lovingly, because in brown bears, the mother cares for her children very lovingly for the first 2 years of life. And then after 2 years, she turns around to him and growls very ferociously and says, "That's enough. Go have a nice life."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in the case of my ex-husband leaving me, and the therapy that we had, which was not Jungian, but we saw two different marriage counselors, so to speak. What essentially came out was that he had decided, or with the help of the therapist, he had decided that I was his substitute mother. And that the problem he faced when my daughter was born was that his mother was taken away from him. And one way he described that was saying that he had put me on a pedestal, but that pedestal was soon identified as a pedestal of an ideal mother. And so what he did in response to that, and I certainly did not give him the boot by any means, was he packed a bag and he left, which astounded me. Mm-hmm. And my daughter was 4.
And this was your husband?
Yeah, this was the man I married, and he asked me to marry him. And it was a birthing coach who was the one who kind of identified what was going on early on, which is to say, when my daughter was 3 days old. He left when she was 4 years old, but when she was 3 days old, he quit his job. And I talked to various people around me, and I said, I don't understand this. I married this guy. He had a job. You know, I was working. Things were going along. Baby was born. And he just quit his job when she was 3 days old. What does that mean? Right? And so the birthing coach said, oh, this is just something that happens to some guys. They just realize they weren't quite ready. And he said, I'm not ready. But he, 3 days earlier, he was saying, this is what I want. And a few years earlier, he had said, this was what I want, when he asked me to marry him and said we'd have a family and la-di-da-di-da.
Yeah, and so was that the end of your relationship entirely, or?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, we're very close friends. I mean, I wouldn't have married someone who I didn't like.
Yeah.
And he was the father of my daughter, so he has stayed very close to both of us.
Oh, good. Okay.
But not always by his, what you might call inclination.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I have a similar experience. I mean, I was with my wife for 17 years, and ultimately, I decided I couldn't get her to grow up. By that time, we had 3 children.
Right.
But, she had very high expectations, and I had high expectations, but they involved my career, and her expectations involved her living arrangement, and those were quite different, because my career couldn't be continued if I gave her what she wanted, and she wanted a father figure, and so that's what she got. Well, this is lots of fun tonight, hiding these people from the channel. Apparently, there are people now who are playing video games, which involve getting people like us to say things. And I don't know whether it's a joke, or whether it's really a video game or it's a real thing, but I'm not going to play that game here, certainly not. And the people that are following on YouTube are, I'm sure, getting a full snootful of this, but I'm canceling these people just as quickly as I can. And this has nothing to do with cancel culture. It just has to do with this is my YouTube channel. And if you're not going to play by rules that I envision, that that means having respect for my YouTube channel, then goodbye. So
well, we're doing work here. I mean,
yes,
I consider this work.
oh, absolutely. And I'm glad we're doing it, because I really want to get to the next chapter. And we're here almost, we don't have that much to go to the end. So we might as well finish it up.
Yes, absolutely.
So are you
yeah, and
reading?
I was last reading, so why don't you start 136?
136. Okay. Yes. The story of this identification by no means ends here. The patient subsequently emphasized that Mrs. X possessed a not inconsiderable artistic capacity, which developed only after her husband's death, and then led to her friendship with the artist. This fact seems to be one of the essential reasons for the identification, if we remember that the patient had remarked what a strong and peculiarly fascinating impression the artist had made upon her. A fascination of this kind is never exercised exclusively by one person upon another. It is always a phenomenon of relationship, which requires two people, insofar as the person fascinated necessarily has a corresponding disposition. But the disposition must be unconscious, or no fascination will take place. Fascination is a compulsive phenomenon in the sense that it lacks a conscious motive. It is not a voluntary process, but something that rises up from the unconscious and forcibly obtrudes itself upon the conscious mind. Okay, so
fascination is not love in this case.
Right.
Fascination sounds like it's what he was calling craving before.
Yeah. And, obviously there's an element of fascination in love at first sight, for example.
Right.
Hello, Jewel. I'm glad that you've made it back to us. But can you hear me now? I hope. I'm just going to send you a note.
I can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me. Wonderful.
I had to switch computers and da-da-da.
Oh, great.
Okay.
I've been listening. Fantastic.
Right.
Oh, thank you for joining us, Jewel.
Yeah. So can you show us your lovely face also, or not?
I thought I did.
The way to do it is you go up into the square in which you appear on the Zoom chat, and in the upper right corner, if you put your cursor over the upper right corner, you'll find three little dots, and you click on that, and then it'll give you the opportunity to turn on your camera.
It's on me.
Pardon?
It froze on me. I put to start the video, so I don't know what's going on, but I'm here. You just can't see.
Okay, well,
we don't see you.
That's fine.
Good to hear your voice.
Yeah, based on what you've been hearing, though, do you have any comments?
Yes, and it goes way back.
Thank you.
By all means.
I like the part where it was talking about the fourth dimension, because where I've been in my world lately, I couldn't understand that I was only living.
Oh dear.
Did we lose you?
Can't hear you.
Uh-oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Now, yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'll hover over this. This is new to this computer. I like the dimensions and the fact that it broadened my thinking, and the fact that so much of my world and my life, for those that you can't see me, I'm 70 years old and I recently had a birthday. And so much of what I've brought
Happy
in-
Yeah, happy
No,
birthday.
it's not that. But thank you. But it is that so much of my thinking today is still much rooted in previous generations
Mm.
Mhm.
and the tribalism, culture, and all of that. And it's in Carl Jung and learning individuation that I get to figure out who I am.
Right.
And in doing that, I have to really focus on me and what I like. And that's why so much of what you were talking about when we go into relationships, going in with expectations that were perhaps put on me that I adopted, which were really not important to me, part of
Mhm.
cultural. You had
Yeah.
mentioned that one also in this. And the bridge that was mentioning and the boundaries. I saw the bridge as taking me in new places, and that could be going backwards and seeing how, not backwards, going in the past to see cultural things that did not work for me at the time that I was in.
Yeah.
And that's where Chip and you and I and our other participant there, tell me your name, it just left me.
Annabelle.
Annabelle.
The culture that we grew up in
Yes.
is so common to us. We could use certain phrases.
Yeah.
And I'm so interested when they say this new generations that are saying Black Lives Matter, they always did. When did they just become important to you? And to me, that almost goes in the fact that I did not grow up privileged.
Mhm.
And therefore, I just didn't judge other people on a social economic experience that I did not see.
Yeah.
So that's where I don't get a lot of what's going on, but it did encompass my thinking, and it's where I am today. The dimensions that I'm talking about that really touched me as I'm working the program with using the word boundaries and bridges is that I
Yes.
have to go into my past, my generation's past, and my previous generation's past to see what is being carried forward and living alive today that is affecting me that was
Right. That's still alive in you today and needs your attention, perhaps. But
exactly. And that's what I'm dealing with right now is
yeah.
as I have set some boundaries and detached, and I'm trying to reconnect. And I did bring mother issues into this and father issues into this, as you said.
Mm.
And going into a marriage with somebody that had their mother issues and father issues and defining what an adult was,
Yes.
it's not always on the same page.
No.
Yeah, it sure isn't. And, it's typical for men to basically want to enter the family business. So my father was a career naval officer, and so I went into the Marines. and even though it was in the midst of the Vietnam War, and that presumes taking a certain amount of responsibility. I mean, they make 21-year-old young men platoon commanders who are responsible for 50 young men who are 17 and 18 years old. And, that's a big responsibility where you not only have to fight a battle with those young men and have them follow your leadership, but you also have to get them fed, have to take care of them when something goes wrong at home, and they have to, do something about that. and all kinds of things can happen in young people's lives, and there you are at age 21 trying to direct traffic. It's not easy. And in the case of my ex-wife, unfortunately, she her expectation, she was the third child in a very stable family. And her father was Mr. Fix-It, he literally built their house around them. Okay, so he had the concrete floor basement poured, and then he moved the family into that basement and literally built the house around them. And it was a beautiful home. But you know, that was her experience of her father. And he was always cutting the grass because he created for himself a huge lawn, very difficult to cut because half of it was on a 45-degree angle, but he managed to do it. But I literally detest doing that stuff. You know, I just hate it. And I'd much rather be in this conversation than cutting the grass, but her father would have been, you know, would be happier out cutting the grass and meditating, right? And so, you know, I ultimately realized that I couldn't be what she expected me to be. I couldn't manage it. And so I said, and it was dragging my career down. So I said, okay, I'm going to Washington, and sorry about that. And she was stunned when I told her that I was leaving. But we stayed very close also, Annabelle. So today I regard her as like my favorite sister. I actually have a sister who is not in good books with me, but that's a whole different question. And you know, it's something that cannot be resolved, unfortunately, because of the physical impairment in her, and so I just have to leave it where it is. And but you know, my first wife, I'm still quite cordial with her, and you know, in terms of my daughter's treatment of me, I don't imagine that their treatment of me is any different than if I had stayed in the marriage. And probably it's better than if I had stayed in the marriage, because that wasn't going to work. But you know, there's another part of life that has to be lived. And let's be clear what individuation means. It means breaking away from the collective. Okay, so, you know, an objective of Jungian psychology is to individuate, to become what you truly are, and to live the life you were intended to live. And you cannot do that if you're in the collective. That's the problem. And you have to break away and do something unique. And so, you know, that's what I've been doing with this YouTube, or the Carl Jung business, for about 20 years now, in terms of my activity. And you know, so it doesn't mean that I've left my business career. I haven't. I spent half the day today on the telephone to Malaysia. And so, you know, even though I have gray hairs, pretty serious ones, and I'm a complete retread, I'm still quite active in my business career. And I couldn't be doing that if I had done what my ex-wife wanted, which was, she just wanted me to become a small town lawyer in upstate New York. And that was about the last thing in the world I wanted to do. I knew too much about it. Okay, so we should finish this up, but so we're up to
paragraph 137.
Right, go.
Shall I begin?
Please do.
It must therefore be assumed that the patient has an unconscious disposition similar to that of the artist. Accordingly, she is also identified with a man. We recall the analysis of the dream, where we met an allusion to the masculine foot. And in fact, the patient does play a masculine role with her friend. She is the active one who always sets the tone, who bosses her friend and sometimes actually forces her to do something she alone wants. Her friend is distinctly feminine, even in external appearance, while the patient is clearly of a somewhat masculine type. Her voice, too, is strong and deeper than her friend's. Mrs. X is described as a very feminine woman, comparable to her friend. So the patient thinks in gentleness and affectionateness. This gives us another clue in relation to her friend. The patient obviously plays the same role that the artist played with Mrs. X. Thus, she unconsciously completes her identification with Mrs. X and her lover, and thus, in spite of all, she gives expression to the frivolous streak in her, which she had so anxiously repressed. But she is not living it consciously. She is rather the plaything of this unconscious tendency. In other words, she is possessed by it and has become the unconscious exponent of her complex.
Yep. Amen. So, you do have to break away and live your own life, but you also need to have others that you can interact with that make you feel complete. And the fact that I continue to do these sessions, part of my completeness relates to the people that participate on these Monday nights with me, where we've done at this point about 250 sessions in the last 6 years. And it makes me feel complete to do them, even though I have no idea what I'm doing. But people seem to like it. We have people here that seem to like it. And Thomas Dennis is one of our regulars here, and he says that moment when friendships break, even if temporarily, is a numinous moment indeed. Strong friendships and deep relationships and marriages. Yeah, it is a numinous moment. And when I went for marriage counseling, I was very frustrated because I was used to a very logos approach to the world. And I asked this analyst, how does this end? What are we supposed to do? And he says, I don't know. Well, he lost me then, because I wanted him to at least tell me something about what was going on in the process, and he couldn't do that. I don't know if he couldn't, but he didn't, and so I was turned off by the psychotherapy profession for a long time because of that. Okay, so shall we? Go ahead. Yes, please.
So one of the things that I'm hearing, I'm going back to dimensions and boundaries and all of that, is I think probably the people that are listening here, I'm going to guess, are a much younger generation. And so to me, talking about dimensions, I have no clue, but each generation brings in another dimension of life and new dimensions. And so I'm in awe of the younger people having more choices of starting life in relationship, jobs, and occupations that they have permission.
I'm sorry, we couldn't hear you after permission. But I like what you were saying.
At the young people entering into relationships but that these people in the new generation, younger generations, have permission to enter into relationships and jobs in ways that were not permittable or acceptable in our time. So I'm excited to be with a group of people who are learning about themselves, group collective, individuation, and maturity going through this. So
yeah, that's great.
So much with this, and that's where I can't sleep almost for a week after hearing this, because the comments that they give from perspectives that I don't have, which adds a dimension in my life that I could not have gotten by staying with my birth family or in the family relationships of with my children and them, and I have outgrown them.
Yeah.
And that is hard for me to say, because it's just the way it is. And that's where I had to learn about boundaries, and I had to learn, and I'm trying to build more bridges so that if I want them to see the world through my eyes that I have now, not through the perception of who I was many years ago when they were growing up, blah, blah, then we have to have a bridge.
Yeah.
When they try to put me back in a pig hole that was given to me at birth, and that doesn't happen, and there's a divorce,
Mm-hmm.
I have to support myself now. So I'd always wanted to do that. So I'm learning new tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Laz says out here on the YouTube channel, the path of individuation is a lonely one indeed.
Very.
He doesn't see it as another dimension, but as a different configuration of energy, that its patterns are not recognized. And boy, do I have a story to tell you about this weekend where I don't know if you know our friend Kushbu, who has been active on this channel, particularly in the Sunday morning and in the advanced reading group. And she read the Bhagavad Gita with me last year. And we are actually in 2020, and it took us 5 months. She read the entire Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit, and I read it in English from 3 different translations. So I actually read it 3 times. But she has been going through a very hard time of understanding her place, or finding a place for herself in the community of Bangalore, India, where she lives. And she lives alone with 11 dogs. And this weekend, just yesterday, in fact, she was baptized in a Christian church in Bangalore. It was really a moving experience for me to observe that and have her, clearly stepping out of the Indian collective. And she was having to do this in a swimming pool that was surrounded by police, because it was surrounded by Hindu right-wing goons who were trying to disrupt the procedure. And she, bravely got through all that and went down in the swimming pool and Esther baptized her. And it was, whoa, it really moved me when I saw that. And, if that's not pulling away from the collective and saying, I'm going to live my own life, nothingness. That was an amazing example of individuation or the process there, because she was pulling away from the Indian collective in general, but she's not pulling away from other aspects, which of course we've been working with her about for a couple of years now. And let's see. Thomas says, my wife had one bad experience with a grief therapist, and her opinion of therapy has been negatively colored by that session almost 13 years back. I don't doubt it. And, I have to admit that I find a lot of things that therapists say to be just obtuse. And they don't listen to themselves in many ways. And this does not include the people that I'm working with, but you have to decide who makes sense and who doesn't. And it's just sad. Well, I don't have to go into examples, but I'm sure many of you have experiences like that. Okay, so where do we get to? We got through 138 or 137? Okay, it's 138 that we're at. Do you
Sorry,
want to?
I was muted. Yeah, we finished 137. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So let's just blast through the last, whatever, three paragraphs. We'll alternate, and then we'll have it under our belt and we can continue to talk about it, but let's get the chapter read anyway. Okay, so you're reading.
Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
We now know very much more about the crab. It contains the inner psychology of this untamed bit of libido. The unconscious identifications keep drawing her down farther and further. They have this power because, being unconscious, they are not open to insight or correction. The crab is therefore the symbol for the unconscious contents. These contents are always trying to draw the patient back into her relations with her friend. The crab walks backwards. But the connection with her friend is synonymous with disease, for through it, she became neurotic.
Right. Strictly speaking, all this really belongs to the analysis on the objective level, but we must not forget that we came into possession of this knowledge only by making use of the subjective level, which thus proves to be an important heuristic principle. For practical purposes, we might rest content with the results so far reached, but we have to satisfy the demands of theory. Not all the associations have yet been evaluated, nor not all the associations have been evaluated, nor has the significance of the choice of symbol yet been sufficiently explained. Okay, go ahead.
We shall now take up the patient's remarks that the crab lay hidden in the water and that she did not see it at first, nor did she at first the unconscious relations which we have just discussed. They too lay hidden in the water. The river is the obstacle that prevents her from crossing to the other side. It is precisely these unconscious relations binding her to her friend that prevented her. The unconscious was the obstacle. Thus, the water signifies the unconscious, or rather, the state of unconsciousness, of concealment. For the crab, too, is something unconscious. In fact, it is the dynamic content that lies concealed in its depths.
And there's a footnote here. I'm not overlooking the fact that the deeper reason for her identification with the artist lies in a certain creative aptitude on the part of the patient. And in some ways, I'm sympathetic with this because, of course, I have developed a strong friendship with Tim Holmes, who's an excellent artist, and yet I see Tim as a brother. I don't see him as a consort in any way. And and that's how we work together like brothers. And so anyway, and brothers in the good way, not the brothers that are trying to kill one another. But Tim has several actual biological brothers who are much closer to him than I am. I mean, I'm just a friend who happened to do some things that got Tim's attention and what we're doing in the summer, and which reminds me, I have to put the link to what we're doing in the summer up so that everybody can see it. And this is a program that we're doing in June in Helena, Montana. It's going to be a unique program. If you come to it, we guarantee that you will have a numinous experience, and probably many such experiences. That is the link. Our lights are dimming here, so I don't know what's going on with my power, but anyway, we'll hope we can keep going. But I put the Confluence link on the YouTube channel. I'll put it here on Zoom as well, although you've probably seen it. That's the link, and it pretty much explains the thing, but we can only have 30 people, so we want to know soon if you have interest in doing it, because in the summer or later on we may not have space, and we only have room for 30. There are quite a number that have committed already. So, but what we're doing in the summer is, remember this sentence that Lawrence Jaffe said, that the essence of Jungian psychology is to open a channel to the healing function of the unconscious. That's the purpose, to open this ego self axis so that there can be movement between the unconscious and the conscious. And that's kind of what we've been talking about here, although this is earlier Jung here in this book, but we're going to have people actually experience how their unconscious opens up, and in several different ways. And so the result of that will be that when you go away from the confluence, you will feel somewhat healed, I would say. Regardless of what your complaints are in life. But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry, did you want to say anything more about this poor lady?
The poor lady and the crab?
Yeah.
I don't really have an image of what her life is going to be like when it's better. Is she not going to have this friend? Is she going to have? Is she going to have frivolous affairs? Oh, the friend had died? The one who she...
I think Mrs. X had died, yeah.
No, I don't mean Mrs. X. I mean the other one who she had the role, the kind of role playing where she was more masculine and the friend was more feminine.
Yeah.
It sounds like the ideal is for that. Well, the word moribund was used about that relationship. So that relationship is moribund. That means that it's bound to die, I guess, or it's better if it dies. And then,
I'm not so sure about that.
I don't know. Yeah.
I think that the purpose of the healing function of the unconscious is to open a channel that lets the unconscious interact with the conscious mind in some way about what would be better, and let her decide. In the end, it has to be the decision of the patient, I suppose. And so, what would be better? What would be better is if she, cut off the claw of the crab in her dream and swam back up to the surface and realized that something was pulling her down. And then, figured out what she was going to do from then. I think that would be better. Right? What do you think? I think that an analyst would, talk to her about it and amplify it, and then hope that another dream comes along that gives a sense of what's going on. And of course, the other dream could, be further drowning, and that wouldn't be good. But maybe the dream would be, since she's the one that has the more masculine attitude, maybe she's smart enough to break the crab's claw and get back to the surface and then integrate what's been going on. And how that will come out, I wouldn't know. It's the same as what the psychotherapist said to me 35 years ago, which is he didn't know how it would come out. When we talked about marriage, I said, well, what are we supposed to do? How does this come out? And he says, I don't know. He says he didn't know. I said, why am I paying you $150 an hour to come talk to you if you don't know what's supposed to be happening? And I still think he should have amplified more than he did. Even today, I think that.
Chip, I must say, maybe Skip, he probably did the best he could.
He did the best he could,
at the time, because I'm wondering, with so many generations on here, and how the world has changed, did each of us go into any relationship? I'm going to call marriage a business relationship, and we had that business plan written out, and we knew where we were headed, and we each had our roles. And that's where I don't think, I do believe that a younger generation now can look at the relationship they're going into in a much broader depth way, and help define who they are when they go in there, and have opportunities to have conversation that were really not encouraged at other times in our world history.
Well, so that's true. Yeah, that's certainly true.
Yeah, that's where I see so much that I look forward to seeing, again, more comments from younger generations. Are they going, and how do they define relationships now? I don't know how to do it, because I'm still figuring out who I am. So yes.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And, I just think that we were not given any sort of heads up about psychology whatsoever. We had a mandatory 1 hour counseling with the pastor of the church where we were getting married, and that was totally useless. I have very little recollection about that counseling, except that it happened. I remember that it happened, but I don't remember what was said. And but today, by having these various sites that people are putting up. I mean, there's now actual psychotherapists that are putting up YouTube channels also, and they're giving various answers to various questions. So I think the current generation is going to be much more informed about what needs to happen in a marriage. But, you know, the point is that you're basically only half wholeness. You can't be whole when you get married without, you have to have yin and yang, and you know, you get it one way or another. It doesn't mean that you have to get it in a traditional marriage, but you have to have these two principles, the feminine and the masculine, that are interacting with one another. And you know, I suppose that they can interact within one person too, because that's largely what happens with me and my wife now, where we don't share our spiritual path very much. She's a dyed-in-the-wool Buddhist, and she's taken a 3-year retreat. So she's she's basically been to divinity school in Buddhism, and she does teachings and so on. And, you know, while I am familiar with Buddhism and have gone to Buddhist meetings and so on, I don't find it my solution, because it's basically two logos for me. And so when you were mentioning having a business plan for a marriage, boy, that's anathema to me. That's just a different personality type that you are, where you must be on the Myers-Briggs. You must be much more of a J person, where I'm a P person. And so, you know,
I can relate to what Jewel is saying, though, because for one thing, when I got married, and maybe I was a little distrustful unconsciously of the marriage proposal, but I felt like, okay, here I'm getting married, which I had questioned through much of my life, and I didn't get married till I was 36. So, and in my family, there were lots of marriages and divorces in other generations, several generations. So I thought, okay, the marriage is a contract. And I kind of went into it with that in my mind, you know, that we're kind of, you know, maybe not exactly signing on a dotted line. But I had spent many years of my life, from a very young age, what you might call adopting a new family for myself. And one of the most conscious ways I did it was I established a publishing house. I asked people to be my authors, and it was both writers and artists, but I always call them my authors. And we would collaborate. And those people are my family. And as the years go by, and some of them have died too, there are a lot of the strains of sibling relationships, a lot of the idealization of, you know, kind of distant relatives who I idealized before, and then by working with them, I idealized them even more. Just all kinds of very blood-like relationships had developed. So when I went into a marriage, this is where what Jewel was saying, it makes sense for me, because in my business, I created a family, and that family still exists. When I got married, I made a contract, and the terms of the contract were broken.
Yes.
Several ways they were broken. And I don't want to say, oh, I'm innocent, I was the perfect wife and mother, and, you know, like, no, we all have imperfections. I certainly had imperfections. And I continue to, you know, peel away the onion. When my ex-husband came to my father's funeral, when we, you know, when he was part of some of the preparation for it, when I've had long conversations with his mother about my father, all of that is part of that very gradual healing and learning. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, Jewel.
Yeah, and I do
appreciate it.
too. Yeah, I do
Yeah.
too, because, and the issue for me was my wife would say, "Oh, you promised to do X, to be X," and but um, she never pointed back to the fact that she was breaking her promises too.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so, you know, I never promised to be a small town lawyer in a town of 5,000 people in upstate New York. I never made any such promise or such intention. And, you know, I got married to my first wife when I was in the Marine Corps and on my way to Vietnam. And we put off having children until after the Marine Corps and after law school. And so I'm sure she had an expectation about, you know, the lawyer profession being, you know, lucrative. And for me, it was deadly. So I couldn't stay in the practice of law. I detested it. And after 5 years, I left and went into business. And, you know, I went to business school and learned a lot of pretty useless statistical information. But it got me into business. You know, it was the step that had to be taken for me to get into doing a multinational business that I'm still doing to this day from 1979 till now.
And that, Skip, is what I'm thinking when I said a business model. I haven't done the test to do which one it is, but what I'm hearing you say earlier, I love it's the yin and the yang. And when we have a role to play, and so that's where I was saying a business plan, who's going to be president, who's going to be whatever. And so many times we go into those roles according to our gender or our occupation. And with that comes unspoken expectations.
Yes.
And for me, on the life trajectory that I was on, so many life situations would change the trajectory that I was on. And you know, they keep happening, but it means you have to sit down and talk with the people, quote, you're in business, family relationships that you're in.
Yeah, sure.
And move to continue that. And if not, then I think that's when the business ends and we can start another one. And part of that coming in from family relationships has surprised me is how much expectations were generational that I was expected to adhere to, and I'm going to call them mother issues that really surprised me being in a relationship. And
anyway, and of course we came up in the 50s and 60s when the motto was "Leave it to Beaver," right? and that sort of thing, and you know, that it looked appealing in a half-hour television program once a week, but when you have to live it, you know, especially if you have two brain cells that rub together, you know, then it's not so good. And you know, Annabelle obviously built her own family with her publishing house, and you know, that means you're building something and doing something creative. I mean, that's what basically I did in my business career for the last 42 years now, where, you know, I was basically on a platform. I was in a good company at one point that called their executive positions the platform. And so selected people would get a platform where they would be the business manager of a certain line of business or in a certain location. We had 16 locations overseas, one of which I started. And so that was my platform. My platform was building the Japanese company. And so for the first 3 years of that 5-year period, I was the only American there. And then I brought another American over to be my deputy and to help me. And that didn't work out so well, but when I say it didn't work so well is because we were right in the beginning of the PC generation, right? And so at the time, a double disk drive, I'm talking about 5¼ inch floppy drives, double disk drive in Japan of an IBM PC cost $10,000. That was the price in Japan at that time. And he bought for the company our first hard drive, and it was a PCXT, I think. And he comes to me after about a month and said, well, I've filled up the hard drive, and it had 10 megabytes of space in it, 10 megabytes of space in it. I mean, we now have files that are 10 megabytes, but in those days, that was all there was. And so he had put 425 files on this PC. And I go, I couldn't comprehend how this PC that we had just bought could already be blown out, which it was. It was, 10 megabytes doesn't take you very far. And we didn't get to 10 gigabytes for another decade after that. Because Bill Gates in those days couldn't get his mind beyond a file that was 640 bytes or something like that. It was crazy stuff. But anyway, I mean, I'm eternally beholden to that guy because he's the one that got me into that company in the first place. This is a real weird situation that came up with us, where first he tried to get me into the corporation and it failed, and then 2 years later he tried again and it succeeded, and then he came to become my deputy, and then that relationship failed, which was too bad because I liked that fellow, but things change. And human beings tend to be, the way I say it is, I used to work with a man who had been the national collegiate champion in speed chess. And that's a chess game in 10 minutes, okay? And so he was the national collegiate champion. He was a brilliant guy, but human beings tend to wiggle a little more than chess pieces, and they have more choices of where to go than 64 squares, right? And they have more choices than the limitations of a chess piece, what it can do. And so that individual couldn't relate well to the actual humans that he was working with in his company, but he was, he was wicked on the chessboard. Anyway, he ended up being a fugitive from justice because he didn't handle his partners well over time, and he had to leave the United States. because of that. Became an exile. So, but that's another whole story you probably don't want to hear. So, Jewel, is there anything else you want to talk about this evening? I think we've reached our quota for the evening, so I want to sort of wrap it up, but I don't want to cut anybody off. So,
I just want to tell each of you that I'm seeing here, everyone that is on YouTube's, I will go back and look at all the comments. I appreciate each person that's here, the effort of you, Skip, and sharing your knowledge and your love of Carl Jung. And I am a student now, and I will be here when I can, which is, if I'm not, you don't see me, I will be listening.
Okay, well, you're certainly also welcome in the advanced group. You know, I do another one at Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, but that's probably too early for you.
I've been listening to that one too. And Annabelle, I appreciate your comments, and you've inspired me with starting your
Thank
business.
you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure interacting with you, Jewel. I really appreciate your presence.
Yeah. And Annabelle, you know, you really impressed me too in terms of putting your family together. And
You mean my publishing family?
yeah, I mean,
I had
all of you.
I had such beautiful New Year messages from some of my authors. I have to say, it yeah, it was very, very comforting.
Mhm. Well, that's terrific.
Yeah.
You know, I was trying to think about how I could get Mando Gorman to come to our confluence today. I was thinking about how I could get to her, because obviously as a best-selling author now, she's obviously got pickets around her, but I have an idea about how I can throw something in over the transom.
Yeah. She seems to have been very involved with her community, her writing community in Los Angeles, or
yeah,
part of. I'm not so familiar with Los Angeles, and I feel like Los Angeles is actually about 67 different communities. But whatever her community is, she seems very involved, and I would guess, since I'm involved with one little community in New York, and I know that everyone involved with that one, which is the Poetry Project St. Mark's, everyone involved with that one, it is a way to get through to people, even people who are who might seem to be hard to reach. So I would think that in one of those Los Angeles communities, there would be a way, at least, that you could be heard by her, you know?
no, I have a more direct way.
Oh, good.
But I mean, that would, you know, everybody knows everybody, 6 people, 6 ops.
Yeah.
And that's definitely true.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've always used that to my advantage hugely. And, you know, it's like I can get to the king of Saudi Arabia in 1 hop. I can get to the prime minister of India in 2 hops, I guess now, or maybe 1. And, you know, there are any number of people like that who I've been connected with over my career. And it's just a question of asking and opening a door and starting to talk about it. And very often you have something to share with one another. And I think we have something to share in terms of the confluence. And she now wants to raise money for a human rights organization. I forget which one. And I think we could help her do that. And the group that we're involved with in Helena got Desmond Tutu to come to Helena and do 2 presentations in their 1,400 seat concert hall. They have a 1,400 seat concert hall there. And they got Desmond Tutu to come, and he gave 2 talks. And the result was that they raised $1 million for him, for his charity. And this was a long while back in '87 that this happened. But, he literally went to Nicaragua via Helena, Montana, just to be with those guys. I don't know if you know this, but Tim is one of 4 guys in the Montana Logging and Ballet Company, which is a satire singing group that he did with his brothers for 38 years. And they finally hung it up in 2013, but they were actually one of the featured acts on NPR at one time as a satirical group. And so they put together a lot of funny bits over that time. And so, somehow they got a connection to Desmond Tutu, and they made the most of it. So anyway, so I think that that's a possibility. I just have to have time to do it. I'm going to try. There's, as they say in the old country, there's no harm in asking.
Good comment. Good comment.
Yeah, I mean, I have to do this tomorrow morning for sure. I've given away about 30 of her new books over Christmas to people, and it's a remarkable book. I have a copy of it here. It's Call Us What We Carry is the name of it. And here she is. She's the woman who did a poem at the inauguration of Biden. And I'll just give you an example. Do you have time to listen to a poem? You want to listen to a poem?
Sure. Always ready for a poem.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Maybe a couple. She did a poem about the guys who were the inspiration for Moby Dick, but I don't want to read that one to you because it's kind of disturbing. But anyway, here's The Shallows. The Shallows by Amanda Gorman. Touch deficient and light starved we were, like an inverted flame, eating any warmth down to its studs. The deepest despair is ravenous. It takes and takes and takes, a stomach never satisfied. This is not hyperbole. All that is gorgeous and good and decent is no luxury, not when its void brings us to the wide wharf of war. Even as we stand stone still, it's with the entirety of what we've lost sweeping through us like a ghost. What we have lived remains indecipherable. And yet we remain, and still we write, and so we write. Watch us move along above the fog like a promontory at dusk. Shall this leave us bitter or better? Grieve, then choose. I just think that's such a powerful ending to that poem. And I'll just read one more. which is the title, the poem that explains the title. I actually have it typed out and highlighted, so give me a minute. I'll get it up on the screen so you can follow it. Let's see. I just have to find where I've hidden it, as usual.
Bet it's more than 10 megabytes on your computer.
Oh, I have 2 terabytes on this computer.
See?
Very, very definitely.
I heard you. I'll be quiet so you can look.
Yeah, just a sec here. Okay. The poem is called What We Carry, and I'll just put it up on the screen for you so that everybody can see it. And it's one of also in this book is the inaugural poem by the way, The Hill We Climb. But here's her poem. I'm not share it. I guess I didn't share it. Are you seeing it now? Okay. What We Carry, from Call Us What We Carry by Amanda Gorman. As kids, we sat in grass, fished our hands into the dirt. We felt that damp brown universe writhe, alert and alive, earth cupped in the boat of our palms. Our eyes waxed wide with wonder. Children understand. Even grime is a gift. Even what is mired is miraculous. What is marred is still marvelous. Art, a boat like that which preserved Noah's family. And I think it's supposed to be ark. I think I miscopied that. It's ark. So I apologize. Okay, ark, a boat like that which preserved Noah's family and animals from the flood. The words come from the Latin word arca, meaning a chest, much like the Latin word arcere, I think. So close up, defend and contain. Ark can also mean the traditional place in a synagogue for the scrolls of the Torah. That is to say, we put words in the ark. Where else to put them? We continue speaking, writing, hoping, living, loving, fighting. That is to say, we believe beyond disaster. Even endings end. At the lip of land, time arcs into itself. It is not a repeat, but a reckoning. Days can't help but walk 2 by 2, the past and the present, paired and parallel. It is the future we save from ourselves, for ourselves. Words matter, for language is an art. Yes, language is an art, an articulate artifact. Language is a life craft. Yes, language is a life raft. We have recalled how to touch each other and how to trust all that is good and all right. We have learned our true names, not what we are called, but what we are called to carry forth from here. What do we carry, if not what and who we care most for? What are we, if not the price of light? Loss is the cost of loving, a debt more than worth every pulse and pull. We know this because we have decided to remember. The truth is, one globe, wonder flawed, here's to the preservation of a light so terrific. The truth is, there is joy in discarding almost everything. Our rage, our wreckage, our hubris, our hate, our ghosts, our greed, our wrath, our wars on the beating shore. We haven't any haven for them here. Rejoice, for what we have left behind will not free us, but what we have left is all we need. We are enough, armed only with our hands, open but unemptied, just like a blooming thing. We walk into tomorrow, carrying nothing but the world. So the book is called Call Us What We Carry. And there's a little paradox in there that you have to search through the book to find the poem that tells you what to call us. But in the end, you heard the answer. So what'd you think, Annabelle? Jewel?
Oh, I like her work. I mean, I am a poetry fan, so I love poetry. And it was neither more nor less the stunning introduction to her work that I had at the, watching the Biden inauguration. I was not familiar with her before.
Yes.
So, and that was quite a stunning way to hear a poet's work for the first time.
Yeah.
I mean, especially for me, I hear poetry most days of my life, read it most days of my life, speak with poets most days of my life. So, yeah.
Well, let me give you another, which I won't read because she was invited 3 years ago now, to when she was like 20 years old, mind you. She was invited.
She's quite young. Yeah.
Yeah, she was invited to read it before the Boston Pops, and I could never do it the way she did. And so I'll just give you the link to that performance. It's called The Believer's Hymn to the
yeah, actually that I've heard. I mean,
Oh,
since I heard her, yes, I did hear that one. Yeah.
Okay.
What's the title to that one, Chip? The Believer's what?
The Believer's Hymn for the Republic.
Yes.
I'm just trying to get it onto the YouTube channel here, so that people can go listen to it, because it's just remarkable. And then she's actually got 2 versions of it on YouTube, because she recited it twice, but in this other version of it, she in the second version of it, she described how it came to be written, and it's quite an interesting thing. I mean, she's an amazing woman. Just, I mean, she's 23, but she's a very, very old soul.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll take my leave, and thank you for joining me tonight.
Yes, thank you.
And
Thank you.
we'll see you next week. Others had a few things going on with the new year, so I'm expecting a few others to be here next week. But anyway, we do what we can do. I even go on solo sometimes, as Jewel knows, because she heard yesterday's presentation that I did, which was 2 hours of pure skip. Anyway, so see you next week. Have a great week. Thanks for being here.
Right. Thank you, Skip.
Peace. Take care.
Thank you so much.